So for each of the 7 Hakafot, and a Hakafah is a processional, but of course we can't do a processional with a lot of people clumped up together, close together, dancing around a Sefer Torah inside our small sanctuary. So we're gonna do the 7 Hakafot tonight, and we're gonna honor different categories of people at CBST. And we're going to ask you, if you're in that category, to dance away in your house, on your chair, stand up and dance when the music plays. And then, at the end of the Hakafah, when we would bring the Torah back, we'll have different aspects of Jack's teaching, and we'll even have Jack teach some laning tonight for those of you who have not yet learned how to read a Sefer Torah or to lane in any way. Lane is the Yiddish word to read. So it's traditional to call the reading of the Torah in Ashkenazic Jewish communities laning. But somebody who reads from the Torah is known as a Bal Koreh, or the person who reads. And Jack Greenberg embodies so many values beyond the technical detail of laning. If you were to look at CBST's 40th anniversary book, and if you have it at home, and if you were to look in the index and you looked up Jack Greenberg, he has probably the longest index of any congregant for content related to him in this book. Jack has served in his years at CBST not only as a teacher of laning, and that has been extensive, and we celebrate that tonight. He was on the search committee, which hired me. He was the chair of the religious committee. He has served on any number of the search committees. He was an editor, one of the 5 of us who edited the CBST B'chol Levavcha, and it is Jack Greenberg is the reason there are no mistakes in any of the nikud, in any of the vowels in Hebrew and the spelling, although we caught a couple of typos, which was not Jack's fault, but the printer issues, which we've corrected in subsequent editions. And Jack's careful attention to both the detail and the gestalt is unparalleled. So tonight we're going to be celebrating Jack as a model of a teacher of Torah, and we're going to be celebrating his many students, and we're going to be celebrating the spiritual activity of reading our ancient texts, as modern, as an LGBTQS synagogue, learning the ability to read a text that's thousands of years old, texts, not texts, but texts that are thousands of years old, with a tradition that's probably 1,000 years old. We are able to dive deep into the history and longevity and arc of our people with this profound act. And Jack Greenberg makes it possible for so many of us to do it. And when he lanes, he models what it is to be a master laner. And so tonight, we're going to start with our first Hakafah, since Jack Greenberg is from Crown Heights. The first Hakafah will honor all those who grew up in Brooklyn, were born in Brooklyn, and or those who currently live in Brooklyn, and anybody who ever lived in Brooklyn. And especially we want to honor anybody who was born, grew up, lived, or lives in Crown Heights. So Hakafah number 1, and Sam will lead us in the chant on page 659.
Ana Adonai Hoshiana, Hoshiana. Ana Adonai Hatzlichana, Hatzlichana. Ana Adonai Aneinu B'yom Koreinu, Elohei Haruchot Hoshiana, Hoshiana. Bochein Levavot Hatzlichana, Goel Chazak Aneinu V'yom Koreinu. Ay, 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 Aneinu, Aneinu
for this section, I am going to interview Jack a bit about his background, so I'm going to invite Jack to join us. Jack, are you there on the Zoom?
I am here.
Hello, Jack. And is Ron with you?
Ron is in another room.
Wonderful. Well, we're thrilled. Ron is Jack's longtime partner who he met here at CBST, but we'll get to that story in a minute. Jack, so I want to start by asking you about your parents. Would you tell us your parents' names and how did they get to Crown Heights? Where are they from?
Well, my mother was born Rose Schwartz on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and my father was born in a shtetl in Poland. It was actually Austria-Hungary when he was born there, Givojits it was called. And he left home to make his way in the world, went to Germany where he had an aunt and uncle living, and tried to get into some business there in the 1930s. Not the ideal time to go to Germany. But he and his uncle's family were able to get out of there in 1938, fairly late, but they got out of there and they came to New York City to other relatives. And he had an aunt on the Lower East Side who had a dress shop, fancy dress shop. And my mother was a customer there. And so my aunt kind of made her shidduch, and that's how they got together. After the war, my father was drafted by the U.S. Army and served in Europe and stayed after the war in Munich to try to find members of his family in Givojits that might have survived the war. And mostly people were murdered there, but two sisters survived, and he found them in a DP camp and brought them to him in Munich. And meanwhile, my mother went over to Germany and got married. So I was born there. I was actually born as an army brat in Munich, Germany. Once my father was able to get his sister's visas to come to the United States, everyone moved back to New York, and they found an apartment in Brooklyn. So that's how we wound up in Crown Heights for about 17 years.
And tell us about the Jewish community in Crown Heights in which you grew up. Were both of your parents from? Describe what your family life was like in the Jewish community you were a part of in Crown Heights.
My father grew up in a frum household in Poland, but once he left there, he was no longer. And my mother also grew up in a religious household, but did not maintain that in her adult life. So together they were secular Jews who observed some traditions. And a cousin in our neighborhood suggested that they send me to a yeshiva in Crown Heights so that I would get some Jewish background. Well, that led to both of them becoming involved in the shul and in the school, and we became Orthodox when I was in third grade, and so I had an Orthodox growing up, and we were part of a modern Orthodox community in Crown Heights, not the Hasidic community, which was kind of coming in at that point. I was not part of that, but it was a multi-ethnic neighborhood and very vibrant. I really liked living there and enjoyed that community as part of my life at that time.
And do you remember going to synagogue regularly as a boy?
Yes, well, for sure, every Shabbat evening and morning and afternoon, and every Yom Tov. And I did go to yeshiva, so we had minyanim at yeshiva. So prayer and Torah study and Torah reading were very much a part of my life from when I was very young.
In the modern Orthodox world in Crown Heights, was the language of instruction in English?
It was, yes, some Hebrew and a lot of English, a mixture, a mixture. I had half a day of religious studies and half a day of secular studies, and um, yes, I'd say more English than Hebrew, but we learned Hebrew. We didn't learn conversational modern Hebrew, but we learned biblical Hebrew, prayer Hebrew, Talmudic Aramaic, and not so much modern Israeli Hebrew.
About
Um,
Yiddish, what about the role of Yiddish in your household or in your community?
Not for me, really. My parents were both fluent in it, but they didn't speak it at home, and I didn't need to know it in school, and so I never really learned it. I picked up odds and ends, but I never really learned it.
So
So
when,
oh, I
so
was
Jack,
going.
sorry.
Go ahead.
When do you remember what your first time laning?
Yes, I attended. So I attended synagogue in the shul that was part of my yeshiva. That was only 3 blocks away. And on Shabbat morning, they had a junior congregation. A rabbi led a service for all of the pre bar mitzvah. I think there, it's hard to remember now, but I think that there were pre-bat mitzvah girls there as well. Although in that community, bat mitzvah was not a big deal, unfortunately. Girls did really not have much of a coming of age ceremony. But I believe that both boys and girls attended that junior congregation. And so, as part of that, the rabbi had a session before services where he taught laning in kind of a rudimentary way. So I learned to lane that way through him when I was about 10 or 11 years old. And I wasn't sophisticated in what I learned. He taught melody and really didn't teach more than that. So I learned which symbols have which melodies, at least in some cases. And I learned to lane that way. So by the time of my bar mitzvah preparation, I already knew laning, and I just had to learn how to chant Haftarah.
So what was your bar mitzvah parsha?
Ishlach, which is 154 verses, and I laned the entire thing, and plus did the Haftarah and did a lot of the davening that morning in the synagogue. It was a large synagogue, so but that was what was expected. It was a rare bar mitzvah who didn't do all of that.
So your first laning was for your bar mitzvah? You didn't do a Megillah or something like that pre-bar mitzvah?
Well, I laned in junior congregation, but my first laning for a minyan that counted was that. Yes, was Vayishla.
And how about learning all of the Megillot and High Holiday Trup, all of those things? When did that happen?
So that came much later. So I had a close friend in college, in high school and college, who after college went to the Jewish Theological Seminary to study to be a rabbi. And I got a job out of college. I was a computer scientist. I got a job in New Jersey and moved to New Jersey. I've been in New Jersey ever since then. And but I was going to NYU for my master's. I would take the train in twice a week and go to classes after work. And sometimes I would drive in. Um, on Wednesday nights, I got together with my friend in his dorm at JTS and his rabbinic student friends, and it would be deli nights. And I would usually, once I got to know them, I'd pick up the deli on the way there, and we'd have a social evening. And my friend and one of his friends were passionate about studying cantillation and what we call Masoretic text, the transmission of the oral law that's involved in creating the Jewish Bible. And so I'd sit at their feet and absorb all of that, and I really loved it. All of the much more sophisticated than what I had learned when I was 10. And so through them, I learned the Haftarah and the Megillot and Esther and Eicha, and I really enriched my knowledge by having these social evenings with them. Um, and, uh, and and then I became a Baal Koreh after that. I was in a synagogue in Brooklyn for a number of years. I was a Baal Koreh there, and um, uh, so I lamed at every opportunity from then on.
Jack, we have a question from chat, which is, did you ever think of becoming a rabbi?
I did think of it, but decided it wasn't for me. There are aspects of it that work. I think I would have been a rabbi teacher rather than a congregational rabbi. I think that might have worked for me, but um, I I talked myself out of it. I thought there were parts of it that really didn't fit me.
Jack, to end this section for Hakafot 1, I'm wondering if you could tell everyone about the first night you came to CBST, which is told, it's a story that's told in our book that you described that to Rabbi Ayelet Cohen, but I'm wondering if you would tell us about that first time you came to CBST, and then we're going to end the first Hakafah.
Okay. I well, I had a lot of issues coming out. Being from an Orthodox background, it was when it dawned on me that I was gay. That was very hard for me, and I had years of difficulty with that, um, and with accepting it. And I won't go through all of that, but I finally did come to accept it. And so then I felt there's got to be something positive out there for me as a gay man. It can't just be, you know, dark rooms to find other men who are the same as I am. That's no life. So I happened to notice the famous ad in the Village Voice that talked about a gay synagogue with Friday night services, and well, I couldn't actually go to it because I was Orthodox, so I couldn't travel. I couldn't travel on Shabbat. So that waited a while. It waited about a year until I came to terms with my orthodoxy and decided that I really was no longer going to be an Orthodox Jew. I would have to find another way because I was tormented. I didn't want to be tormented over being gay, and Orthodoxy at that time did not leave me an option to be open and accept myself and remain orthodox. At least I didn't know it. If it existed, perhaps some people will say that they found a way, but I didn't find it. So as soon as I decided that it was okay not to be Orthodox, I went on vacation to Israel, and I was not Orthodox in Israel for 2 weeks, and and that was okay for me. And I decided if I could do that in Israel, then I could manage my life. And I came back, and the first free Friday that I had, I went into New York and went to CBST. And it was not easy to find that entrance up the ramp in Bethune Street, until I found that. And then you have to walk up this isolated ramp all by yourself into a room, and God knows what I was going to find there. And I I walked into the what would you call that? The vestibule of our space on Bethune Street, and the same person always sat at the door every week greeting people. I don't know if I should mention the name. but he always sat at the door greeting people. And I walked in and I said, "This is my first time here." And he was very welcoming, excited. And he brought me in and started introducing me to people. And I felt like I had a home there from the very first night. I just felt that I belonged there. The service was beyond strange to me. Um, I'd never been to a service that had English in it. And it was very strange to be sitting there and being part of that. There were a lot of English readings at that time in the service. And however, I wandered around the social hour afterwards. I'm a quiet person. I don't meet people easily. I don't know if I met anyone the first week, but there was the next time I came back, there was a new person's um, like a rap group, people sitting around talking, and I was drawn into that, and I got to know other new people. And in a very short time, I felt like I was part of that community, and I started to get involved and started to do things there. And it's been a home for me ever since.
We at CBST are deeply grateful, and you have made this a home for so many others. So now we turn to Hakafot number 2, and we are going to honor and celebrate anyone who during the pandemic spent time studying anything Jewish, whether it's Hebrew language or reading or a topic or Psalms or music or Yiddish. Anybody who spent any time during this pandemic studying anything Jewish. So we will celebrate you, and when the music is on, we expect you to be dancing like crazy. Page 661.
דובר צדקות הושיענה הדור בלבושו הצליחנה ותיק וחסיד עננו ביום קוראנו איי 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 עננו עננו ביום קוראנו איי 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 עננו עננו ביום קוראנו איי כל הנשמה תהלליה הללו הללויה כל הנשמה תהלליה הללו הללויה הללו 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 כל הנשמה תהלליה הללו הללויה כל הנשמה תהלליה הללו הללויה.
And for this, the second Hakafah, Jack will teach us.
Thank you, Rabbi. I thought I would start with explaining what it is exactly that we're talking about when we talk about trope symbols and cantillation. Where does that all come from? It was an ancient concept that Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, received the Torah directly from God on Mount Sinai. And Moses transmitted the Torah to uh, the people Israel of that generation and passed it on to Joshua, who was the next leader. And Joshua transmitted it to the next generation, and so on, and so on, and so on. And there was a political body of Judaism that ensured that the Jewish Bible would get transmitted down through the generations. Originally just the Torah, but other writings were considered holy and got attached to the Torah, and at some point, the religious leadership decided to codify which of these writings should be part of the Jewish Bible and which shouldn't. So we wound up with the 5 books of the Torah, all the books of the prophets, and a lot of other writings that were also individual books. I say books, but they were all scrolls. They were all scrolls. Some of them two-sided scrolls like the Torah that we see, and some of them one-sided scrolls like a window shade. And those scrolls are called Megillot, and there are 5 of them that are just one-sided. Um, some books didn't make the cut. So the book of Maccabees was not. It was decided that would not be part of the Jewish Bible. It was a writing of the time, but not considered holy enough to be part of the Bible. And at some point, the order of the books was codified, and we wound up with our total Bible as we have it now, called the Tanakh, which is an acronym for Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, the Torah, the prophets, and the other writings. So the Tanakh was considered holy and had to be transmitted as it was from generation to generation, from scroll to scroll, forever. Originally, when there was a state of Israel, it was in a state of Judah, I should say. It was in the hands of the scribes, Sophrim, the ones who actually wrote these scrolls. They knew all the traditions of how the letters should be formed and what little tags should be put on some letters, how the lines were, how the spacing between words, there's occasional paragraph spacing, column width, all of that detail, um, uh, plus all the detail of what goes into making and creating a Torah scroll, the materials and the instruments, which we heard about last Simchat Torah. Um, so their function was to transcribe one scroll from another and to teach. All the scrolls have in them are letters, nothing else. The Hebrew letters, for those who are not so familiar, are consonants. It would be like writing an English sentence with only the consonants, no punctuation, and no vowels. And they would have to orally transmit how to read these words, how to make vowel sounds around the consonants, where do the verses end, and so on. And that was done as an oral tradition while there was a governing body of Israel. And what they transmitted orally is called Masorah or Masoret, which means oral tradition relating to the pronunciation and writing of the Jewish Bible, the Tanakh. After the destruction of the Second Temple in the year 70, there was a mass dispersal of Jews. Most of the Jews of Jerusalem were exiled, not all. Jews always remained in Israel, but Jews had already been living in various places in the world outside Israel, and so there was a mass exodus all over the Middle East and parts of Africa and parts of Europe, and no longer a central body to dictate what our Torah should look like and how it should be interpreted. and how the laws should be interpreted. So scholarly groups grew up in the major centers where enough Jews resided that there could be yeshivot study centers, and scholars would spend all their time debating laws and analyzing the scripture and analyzing the Talmud, which was the rabbinic law that came after the scripture. And if they had questions, they would write to other communities and communicate with other communities around the world. And at some time, they saw it couldn't all be oral. It had to be codified in some written way. Well, you couldn't write inside a holy scroll. It was holy and couldn't have any additions to it other than what was there from early days. There are some letters in the Torah have dots over them, but that wasn't added later. That's an early tradition that scholars debate what is the meaning of those dots over these letters. So for them to actually interpret and record their interpretations, they had to create copies of all of these scriptures that were considered not holy, that weren't for public reading of a book, but that were considered study texts and could be marked up. So they created codices. Singular is codex. And what they are equivalent to our books today. They're parchment pages that are stitched together between wooden covers. And they wrote out all of these various books, the Torah and all the others. And then they could mark them up with symbols that we would call vowels, that would tell you how do we pronounce the words, or that we would call punctuation, periods and semicolons and commas, but they didn't do it that way. So, and each of these communities around the world created their own symbols. They all decided that's a good idea, and they created their own way, and then they debated with each other about what the best way was, and eventually one of these groups won out. So we're talking about Masorah, and each of these groups were called Ba'alei Masorah, the masters or the studiers or the leaders of the oral tradition. And the particular group that won was the one in Tiberias, okay, which is in northern Israel around the Sea of Galilee. And their version of notation is what we have today. All the groups around the world agreed to go with that notation, and that's what we have. And that is in the printed Humashim, the texts that are printed versions of the Torah. What we see and what allows us to read those words, those verses, without somebody standing over us and teaching us, is the notation that the Tiberian Baalei Masorah created. So, Rabbi, could you show the first slide? All right. So, Masorah was involved with the traditions, the notations, the vocalization, and the interpretation that went into each of the books of our Tanakh. And as a result of that, the Baalei Masorah created vowels and dots and letters, accents, symbols that were accents, hyphens, pauses, musical tropes, and all kinds of footnotes about footnotes were very important because not every word is pronounced the way it looks. So a Masoretic footnote would say, don't read this word this way, read it that way. Don't assume this word is plural because it's missing this letter. It's really singular and it's pronounced this way, and so on and on and on and on. And also, this word in the Torah is not printed by mistake. It's correct the way it is, just to ensure that down the line there wouldn't be any changes. And they were very, very successful. We're talking about these people working from the year 400 or so. The earliest known person was in Palestine, and his name is, and I wrote it down. Dosa ben Elazar. He lived around the year 400. and fragments of materials that we have. He is the first person, the earliest person referred to. And went on until about 1200, 1300, when these communities started to die out. So, but by then there was a good body of notation left for the next generations. Um, so, one more slide, Rabbi. Yeah, so here's an example of the vowels. So the Hebrew vowels are in the middle columns. The X is any Hebrew letter, and the vowels are either under them or over them, or yes, under or over, and they have names. So the vowels actually have names. Many of you may know, and uh, this is the version of the Tiberian Ballet Masorah that we have in our Chumashim today. And below that, I show that letters can have dots in them. Dot is a dalgesh. A dot and a hey is a mafik. Some letters can never have dots. That's called rafeh. And so all of this was created to tell people how to pronounce the words. Thank you. So here's an example of punctuation. So the sof pasuk is a colon after the last word in a verse. Usually in our modern printing, it's printed as two diamonds. It was really just two dots on their parchment, but it's printed now as two diamonds, and it indicates the end of a verse. There's no music attached to it. It is just punctuation. A pasek underneath that is a vertical bar on a line. Maybe you've never paid attention to that. The next time, if any of you who attend services and look in a Chumash, you'll notice that occasionally there are these vertical bars on the same line as the letters, and you've just skipped over them, ignoring them. There are a very low level of pause. They're telling you there needs to be a slight pause here for one reason or another. I don't want to go into all that detail, but just to show you that they created a punctuation mark. And a meteg on the right side is a tiny little vertical line underneath a letter. If there's a vowel under there, it would go after the vowel to indicate a secondary accent. A secondary accent. There's another way of indicating where the accent, the primary accent is. And if there are more accents earlier in the word, on the first line there, I have the word Moshevotechem to the right. Yes. So that word is accented where the arrow is on the chem. But the other two vertical lines are meteg. There's a rhythm to that word. Moshevotechem. Right? The mo and the vo, those are secondary accents, and it's the meteg that tells us to do that. So that's as much as I want to say about that. And the next time I talk, we'll talk about the tropes and what they do and what the function of the music was.
Thank you so much, Jack. And I love that tonight we're actually learning and celebrating this amazing tradition, that you are the conduit, you are the vessel that's bringing it to so many of us at CBST. So Hakafot number 3, we're honoring everybody who's ever studied Hebrew at CBST and anyone who's had a bar mitzvah at CBST at any time. Page 663.
Zach ve'yashar Hoshiana Chomel da'alim Hatzlichana Neinu biyom koreinu ay anenu biyom koreinu ay anenu biyom koreinu ay
For this third Hakafot, Jack is going to teach a brief introduction to how to lane. And for those whose appetite is then inspired by this, there are many classes at CBST to continue. But Jack, will you give us the introduction to how to lane?
So could we have the first slide, please? The next one, yeah. Okay, so the Balei HaMasorah also created something that we call tropes. For those of you who read Hebrew and who have seen a Chumash and who read a Chumash, you could probably read a verse, whether or not you had learned to do this chanting. And you tuned out all of these little symbols that you didn't know what to do with. The words in the Chumash or in any Hebrew text um, have symbols on them that have various functions. And without knowing what they are, you can simply read and ignore them. So what they do is they explain to you how to read the verse. Tropes have three major functions. One is for melodic recitation. These scriptural books are read publicly. Back in ancient times, they were read to large groups of people in public squares. And it was much easier for people to listen and understand these readings if there was a melody attached to them than if they were just read as an address. Right? And the melody is also used for instruction, for teaching children. It's found that people listen more and remember more when there's music attached to what the instruction is. So the fact that these symbols are called tropes relates to their musical function. They're also called notes, even though each one is not a single note as we know it in Western notation, but rather a pattern, a group of notes together. And the Hebrew word nigina also means note or trope. The second function of the symbol is for accentuation, and sometimes they're referred to as accents. All but 5 of the symbols are above or below the first letter of the accented syllable of the word. So they tell you where to accent the word when you're reading it. It's very important for understanding. Sometimes the difference between a verb in past tense and in future tense is just where the accent is. And the trope is very helpful. So, of course, when we say the Shema in our prayers, and we say Vishinan Tam Levanecha, we don't say V'dibarta bam, because that's a future verb, and the trope that's on that word tells us to say V'dibarta bam. So I want to hear that from all of you from now on. No more V'dibarta bam. Thank you. So another function of the tropes is punctuation. And to that extent, a trope is called a ta'am or ta'amim. We know that ta'am means taste, but it also means meaning. And the tropes are a system of pauses and connectors. In technical terms, they're called disjunctives and conjunctives. The pauses have a hierarchy. Some pauses are like periods, some are like semicolons, some are like commas. They get weaker and weaker. Depend on the longer the verse, the more variety of tropes to get this diversity of pause values. And the words in between the pauses are not pauses, they're conjunctives, they're just connectors, and they all have musical value so that the entire verse can be read pleasantly according to its punctuation. It's important to know, if you know the tropes well, you know when to pause for how long, so that somebody who understands Hebrew can actually hear the meaning of the verse by listening. So let's go to the next page. Yes, so this is a table that's overwhelming. Um, the first column on the left shows all of the tropes that are pauses with an X as any Hebrew letter, and where they would go above or below or to the left of that letter. And the second column is the name of the trope. Uh, this, all of these tropes are used in 21 books of the 24 books of the Jewish Bible. There are 3 books that have a whole separate system of tropes. Those are called the Poetic books of the Bible. They're Psalms, Tehillim, Proverbs, Mishlei, and Job, Eo. And they have a totally different set of tropes attached to them. Some of the symbols are the same. Some of the names of the symbols are the same, but they're different and their functions can be different. And I don't know any music for those books. So perhaps, I don't think traditionally anything has been passed down to us, but I believe that some people, modern people, are working on creating music out of those tropes. But the other 21 books all use the same system of tropes that you see here on these pages, and they're interrelated in the same ways. Only the melodies that are used for public readings might be different. So the right column shows the same thing, but with tropes that are the connectors, or the conjunctors. So, and that's a total set. Now, the melodies that we have for these don't go back to the time of 70 CE. We don't know those early melodies, but somewhere in the Middle Ages along the way, melodies started to be created, early Middle Ages. And in the various communities that Jews dispersed to, um, they were affected by the melodies of the region. And so Jews of India, their tropes sound more like the music that they would find in their communities. And Jews of China, and Jews of Morocco, and Jews of Poland, and Jews of France, all different. And in some places, you didn't have to go too far to another town to find variations in tropes. Uh, but they all had a core of the same melody. People have done studies on these melodies, on the very basic part of melodies, find a lot of similarities between something, between the same tropes in very far reaching places that you wouldn't expect. Now, it doesn't sound so much when you're hearing them all together, but the basic core is the same. And so the tropes that I have learned are an Eastern European Polish tradition, and that is mostly what I teach. There are many other things that you can learn today, and the Reform movement, for example, has created or developed something that they named Avery Binder, that is similar but has variations, so that all Reform congregations around the world would adhere to that specific trope style. The conservative movement has done something similar to that. They call Rozovsky. So there have been more modern developments on tropes that still adhere to ancient traditions. So let's go to the next page. So here's a verse that I just want to go into briefly to show you the punctuational and pause value of the tropes. So without knowing the tropes, we're just going to look at the first half of this verse. And not all of you can read Hebrew, I'm sure, but I will read. Hu yikatavo. The person will cleanse oneself with this is about cleansing with the ashes of a red heifer. So the person will be cleansed with the ashes of the red heifer, Vayom Hashlishi, on the 3rd day, Uvayom Hashriyi, and on the 7th day, Yithar, the person will be purified. So, and the second half of the verse is the same thing in the negative. So I won't go into that, but how do we interpret this verse? Must the person be cleansed on both the third day and on the seventh day to be purified? Or must the person be cleansed on the third day and then, if they wait until the seventh day, they'll be purified? Or maybe the person needs to be cleansed with the ashes right away, and then on the third day and on the seventh day they're purified. So the tropes tell us, the placement of the tropes and their pause values tell us that the first reading that I said is correct. They must be cleansed on both the third day and on the seventh day, and if they do both of those cleansings, then they will be purified afterwards. So that's one example. Let's go to the next one. So here's a verse. Vayikach. Vayikach is the verb, the predicate of the sentence. Both the subject and the predicate. Vayikach means and he took, and he took. And then the whole rest of the verse is who's he? And he, it turns out, is many people, not just a he. So really, sometimes the Torah uses he in singular instead of plural when there's a singular a name or object immediately following the verb. So all we know is somebody took. And then we have all these names. Korach, the son of Yitzhar, the son of Kehat, the son of Levi, and Datan, and Aviram, the sons of Eliav, and On, the son of Pelet, the sons of Ruvain. Well, how do we make any head or tail of that? How many people are we talking about? Who's the son of who? You know, is Korach the son of Yitzhar? And then Ben Kahat is the son of Levi. And then maybe Aviram is the son of Eliav and On. How do we divide all of this up? So the tropes, just the way the tropes are placed, tell us that Korach was the son of Yitzhar, who was the son of Kehat, who was the son of Levi. And there's a big pause there. So Korach, that's just one person, 4 generations of one person, Korach, who came from the tribe of Levi. Then we have Datan and Aviram, that's 2 more people. Both of them are the sons of Eliab. Then we have On, that's now a 4th person. On is the son of Pelet, and all 3 of them, Datan, Aviram, and On, are from the tribe of Reuven. So it is only the tropes that tell us all of that. Otherwise, we might think On was from the tribe of Reuven, and we don't know where Datan and Aviram came from. The tropes tell us how to read this verse. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So here's an example. This is when I teach laning. This is the first page of trope patterns that I teach. These tropes are not placed randomly on words. They're placed for their pause effect, and they're placed under or above the letter of the accented syllable. So these are the names. Mercha, Tipcha, and Siluk are the names of the 3 tropes on this page that we're going to sing. And if we look on the left side of the page, where the 3 big X's are, to the right of the arrow, move the arrow to the right, please. Yeah. No, left, left, left. Yes, right there. With the 3, that's it. Okay. So the topmost symbol under the X is called Mercha. It's a curve that goes down to the left under the letter. And the next one on the next line, which is left of that, yes, that is called Tipcha, and it's a curve that goes to the right under the letter. And the third one is called Siluk, and it's a vertical bar underneath the letter. And that Siluk is a very strong pause. The Tipcha is a not so strong pause, but stronger than others. And the Mercha is a connector. It leads into both Tipcha and into Siluk. And it goes together in the 6 ways that I have it on the right side of the page. And the traditional way of learning the melody is to sing it according to the name of the trope. So that's what I'll do. I'll sing line 1, and the siluk is placed under the lamed because the accent of the word siluk under that lamed. So the siluk is placed on in the Hebrew under the lamed. Siluk, siluk, and that's how that will always sound in the trope that I teach. And the line below, line 2, we have a mercha leading into siluk, and this mercha is mercha siluk, mercha siluk. The line below, we have a tipka, the smaller pause, followed by siluk, the larger pause. Tipka, siluk, tipka, siluk. Then line 4, we have tipka followed by mercha siluk. Tipka, mercha siluk. Tipka, mercha siluk. Then on line 5, we have mercha leading into tipka. Mercha tipka siluk. Mercha tipka siluk. And on line 5, we have the complete pattern with mercha in front of both tipka and, I'm sorry, line 6. Mercha in front of both tipka and siluk. Mercha tipka, mercha siluk, mercha tipka, mercha siluk. So, of course, these words, mercha tipka siluk, are not in the Jewish Bible. The words that contain the symbols will have to take the melody of these tropes and match the musical accent to the word accent. And sometimes that's involved by stretching a word, by stretching the trope, by chopping off a bit of melody. There's a technique for knowing how to do that depending where the accent is the word is and how many syllables it has. So let's go to the next page. So here's an example of a verse. So this is what's in the Torah. There are no vowels. There are no dots in the letters. There's no end of verse. It says, Vayedaber Adonai El Moshe Lemor. And those dots and things underneath the letters, that's just bad copying or from the line below. They don't exist, right? That's not there. Okay, Vayedaber Adonai El Moshe Lemor. And God spoke to Moses saying, and whatever God said would follow in the next verse. And there it is on the line below. The first line there is the paragraph where that appears. So there's no way to even know that that's the end of a verse if we didn't have the sof pasuk, that colon that tells us. Many people learned siluk as sof pasuk, but the sof pasuk is punctuation. It's just a colon between verses, and the siluk is a trope symbol that's placed to tell you where the accent of the word is. So remember, mercha tifcha, mercha siluk, vayedaber Adonai El Moshe Lemor. Now, if I were teaching Avery Bender, that would be Vayedaber Adonai El Moshe Lemor. So that's consistent within that system. And if this were in a haftarah, I have to think now. Vayedaber Adonai El Moshe Lemor. That's not right. Wait a minute. Vayedaber Adonai El Moshe Lemor. That's right. Okay, high holidays would be Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe Lemor. Esther would be Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe Lemor. The Megillot that are read on the pilgrimage festivals, as we read Kohelet this morning at services. Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe Lemor. And the last one that I know is Eicha, Lamentations on Tisha B'Av. Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe Lemor. Okay, not easy for me to keep all that in my head at the same time. So a class with me would just be teaching one of those systems, and we would go week by week and learn all of the possible trope patterns that exist in the Torah or the Haftarah, whatever we will learn. So I hope that in the future, some of you will join a class that I teach.
Oh, Yasher Koach, Jack, that was just fantastic, fantastic. And now we continue with Hakafot number 4, and we're honoring all of those who are ready to dance a little bit. And you could do it sitting in a chair with some motions of your arms or getting up. Let's see some energy there. And we do the chant on page 663 for Hakafot number 4.
המחשבות הושיענה, הושיענה, כביר ונאור הצליחנה, הצליחנה, לובש דקות עננו ביום קוראנו, איי 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 עננו, עננו ביום קוראנו, איי 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 עננו, עננו ביום קוראנו.
So Jack, for this Hakafot, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about teaching at CBST. So Jack, tell us, what are the different systems that you've just described that you've actually taught at CBST? Which ones have you taught?
I have taught all of those that I mentioned, except maybe Esther. I don't know if I've ever taught a class in the Gilad Esther, but maybe I did. But I know I definitely taught the others.
And tell us about how you and Ron met.
So I had just started going to CBST in January 1980, before any of you were born. And Ron was living in California at the time and came in with his family for his nephew's bar mitzvah in May of 1980. And he had begun going to our sibling congregation, Bet Chaim Chadashim in Los Angeles, a year earlier. And he wanted to see what a similar congregation in New York was like. So he came to services on the first day of Shavuot, which was in May that year. And we met each other there in this small, intimate service. It's easier to meet people at the time, maybe now too, in a smaller group than in a large sea of people. And we sat there, and he actually had the Aliyah for the Aseret HaDibrot, the Ten Commandments, that I was chanting. So we kind of met up there at the Ten Commandments on the Bima, and then we sat together. The whole group really sat together over lunch at Kiddush, and we really got to know each other. And I drove him home back to where he was staying in Brooklyn with his cousins, and we saw each other, I think, 4 or 5 more times in the week that he was in New York before he went back to California. And we just both knew that that was it. And I was originally going to move to Los Angeles area where he was living. And in the end, I had reasons where I felt I couldn't move away. I didn't want to do that. And he decided he would move back to New York where he grew up and be with me. And so that is now 41 years ago.
Jack, I have to tell you, I just looked up on page 231 of the 40th anniversary book of CBST, which lists a sampling of Lair House classes from 1998 to 2012, and you are listed there as teaching Megillat Esther cantillation. So question is solved. You're also listed here as teaching High Holiday cantillation, Haftarah cantillation, and Torah cantillation. So in those years, you did teach it, in fact. And we are going to, in the next Hakafot, celebrate all those whom you have actually taught. And I know you've taught adults and kids, although when you first were at CBST, we certainly didn't have any kids at CBST at that time. I have a question for you that I'm not sure you can actually answer, Jack, because it goes to something that speaks to your modesty and the humble person you are. One thing that moves me deeply, Jack, is how deeply you care about the precision of laning and how generous and loving you are for all of us who lane imperfectly. And I want you to, as my last question to you, how do you do that? How do you care so deeply and you're so precise and you're the most generous and non-judgmental and loving of teachers and of congregants? You're both deeply rooted in tradition, and you've also been very supportive and interested in creative new rituals to this day. Could you just reflect on that?
That's a challenge.
This one.
I can't be taken out of my traditional background, and so I have a very, very deep connection to tradition, and especially in this area, it just really reaches into my soul. It just grabs me in a certain way. At the same time, CBST accepted me as the man that I am, and I grew with it. I found it to have traditions of its own, and then I was part of creating traditions, especially in the ritual and religious area, as CBST matured. Once you were part of CBST, I worked with you on that. It was very important to me that we recognize that we are something very special here, and that we're not just here to hold on to the ancient tradition, as important as that is to me. So I am a strange mixture. I can sit with my Siddur or my Machzor and say all the prayers that we don't say, and at the same time say all the additional prayers that we do say, and care very much that there's feminist language and modern interpretation. So I have evolved into an unusual mixture of things that are important to me. And I try not to be judgmental of other people in their efforts to learn and to create and to do. I think it's important for people to share, and if they're imperfect along the way, well, that will change, that will get better, and I accept that.
Thank you so much, Jack. That's so moving to hear you and to be with you tonight. So for Hakafot number 5, we are celebrating those who are students of Jack. If you have been a student of Jack in any context here at CBST in the course of these 40 years, if you'd like to send a message to Jack, write it in the chat and offer him a blessing or express your gratitude or tell us in the chat what year or in which context you studied with him. And we turn to page 665 for Hakafot number 5.
Melech olamim Hoshiana, Hoshiana, Naor ve'adir hatzlichana, hatzlichana, Somech noflim aneinu biyom koreinu. Ay, 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 aneinu, aneinu biyom koreinu. Ay, 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 aneinu, aneinu biyom koreinu. Ufshaftem mayim b'sason mimayei ha'yeshua. Ufshaftem mayim b'sason mimayei ha'yeshua. Mayim, 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 hey mayim b'sason. Mayim, 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 hey mayim b'sason. Hey, 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 mayim, 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 mayim b'sason. Mayim, 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 mayim b'sason. Ufshaftem mayim b'sason mimayei ha'yeshua. Ufshaftem mayim b'sason mimayei ha'yeshua. Mayim, 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 hey mayim b'sason. Mayim, 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 hey mayim b'sason. Hey, 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 mayim, 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 mayim b'sason. Mayim, 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 mayim b'sason.
And now we will, for Hakafot, this is Hakafot number 5. Rabbi Rapport and I are going to read the names of all of Jack's students that we've been able to reconstruct over these, preparing for tonight. And if we've missed you, put your name in the chat. We'll add you to this very moving and impressive list. Whoops. So I'm going to start the reading, and then we'll go back and forth and share these names. And where we indicate somebody is a rabbi, and there are several on the list, they weren't rabbis when they were students of Jack's, and for some of them it was their first step into the world of laning altogether. Marnie Arlev, Benjamin Adler, Jonathan Adler, Rabbi Alan Lepayover, Hilbert Albert, Narda Alcorn, Rafaela Ancho, Laura Antonio, Renee Bajel, Michael Barr, Eula Barak, Yael Bat Chava, Aaron Benderson, Jacobo Bendahan, Adria Benjamin, Tara Benton, Ruth Berman, Leslie Bernstein, Mark Bieber, Ken Binder, Eileen Block, Mitchell Bloom, Sharon Bonder, Michael Broder, Martin Bruner, Salem Buchholz, Henry Carey, Shayna Call, Amy Chasanoff, Daniel Chesser-Turan, Rabbi Ian Chesser-Turan, Cindy Cogdill, Marcia Cohen, Phyllis Cooper, Rafael Cortez, Robert Couturier, Noreen Dean Dresser, Leslie Deutsch, Liz Deutsch, Manny Deutsch Dornfeld, Mickey Deutsch Dornfeld, Diane Holzinger, Barbara Dolgen, Roy Doliner, Kevin Donahue, Liz Dornfeld.
Sherry Dratfield, David Eric, Janet Englund, Robert Eppenstein, Mike Ezon, Ora Ezrahi, Sandy Faddis, Susan Falk, Sabrina Farber, Ben Farber Shapiro, David Feinberg, Helene Feldman, Kim Fellensaal, Elizabeth Free, Joel Friedland, Sherry Feynman, Liz Galst, Sandra Gelman, Leslie Gewirtz, Herb Givner, Louis Goldstein, Sharon Golub, Ellen Gould, Donna Gray, Lisa Green, Deborah Griboff, Ruth Gursky, Lori Hannon, Dean Harris, Helene Harris, Rebecca Harris, David Harrison, Kim Havison, Jeannie Heller, Neil Hoffman, Judith Hollander, Andy Engel, Harvey Israelton, Joanne Jacobson, Mark Janover, Marcy Kahn, Valerie Kamea, Martin Carlo, Lisa Kartzman, Erica Katz, Jeff Katz, Larry Kay, Marianne King.
Melanie Kohler-Levav, Karen Kropp, Daniel Kropp Sigmund, Eli Kropp Sigmund, Timothy Kennard, Mark Landis, Sybil Landau, Joni Lant, Rabbi Lori Gold, Jeremy Lawrence, Dina Leonard, Hope Levav, Harold Levine, Michael Levine, Ruth Lowenkron, Ari Ludvigsen, Harry Lutrin, Judy Maybach, Irene Meisel, Marcia Melnick, Nancy Mertzel, Susan Meyer, Sheila Michaels, Annette Miller, Marilyn Michon, Linda Moldovan, Rachel Monaco, Glenn Monis, Gail Nalvin, Jack Neiman, Karen Nothman, Mindy Novick, Julia Ostrov, Lisa Padilla, Janet Pavlov, Ricky Penn, Susan Pensack, Ginny Pierre Singletary, George Perloff, Julia Porper, Jane Posnick Bondarin, Yolanda Podosinski, Richard Radvin, Rabbi Rapport, Michael Reichbach, Lachelle Renee Boussy.
Eric Rosenbaum, Mia Rodstein, Elizabeth Sapreto, David Schwartz, Lou Siegel, Sin Senasib, Scott Shapiro, Jonathan Sheffer, David Schmidt-Chapman, Lori Siegel, Sarah Siegel, Stephanie Sigmund, Sarah Sloan, Linda Solomon, Scott Soloway, Devorah Stahl, Catherine Sull, Judith Tax, Barry Temkin, Hannah Temkin, Leah Tracton, Susan Unger, Cecilia Urban, Pierre Vallet, Mike Waldman, Ron Weiss, Jeffrey Weiss, Felix Wolf, Oscar Wolf, Barry Youngerman, Cantor Steve Zeidenberg, and Brian Zumhagen. 186 people that we could collect.
This is quite a legacy that you, Jack, have given to CBST and to all of these human beings, and we are so grateful as everyone is. So please, if you are one of his Jack students, write that in the chat if you know which year, or offer some words for Jack. But we acknowledge this Masorah that Jack acknowledged from the beginning, that the Torah is handed down generation to generation, and Jack Greenberg is a deep part of that tradition. And now for the 6th Hakafah, we celebrate the founding generation of CBST and new members who have arrived in the last year, as well as members who don't live in the tri-state area, those who are distance members. So please, if you are one of those, we expect to see you dancing during the music. We begin on page 665.
Ozer Dalim Hoshiana Podeh Umatzil Hatzlichana Tzur Olamim Aneinu V'yom Koreinu Ay, 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 Aneinu לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש, קדושתך נקדיש, לשבחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש, לעולם לעולם ועד. לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש, קדושתך נקדיש, לשבחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש, לעולם לעולם ועד.
Beautiful. And now for a final few words from Jack as we finish Hakafot number 6. Over to you, Jack.
Okay. It's been so important to me over the years to be involved in both the chanting and the teaching of the chanting. I get my deepest spiritual connections through this ancient text, through knowing when I chant something, it's based on music that's hundreds of years old, that's based on a system that's 1,000 or 1,500 years old, that's based on text that's more than 3,000 years old. And it just reaches into me. I feel the most spiritual when I'm connected. And when I'm standing at the bima reading Torah, the letters leap out at me, and I feel that. I look at, the letter Pei in the Torah, in many traditions, the white space within the letter Pei is a letter Bet. And I feel like those Bets and Peis are reaching me, are calling out to me. Whenever there are dots over letters or small letters or large letters, I feel, I'm the one standing up there reading, and I'm feeling it. It's there for me. So I get such a deep spiritual connection out of all of that. And teaching it to other people has been very, very special. I'm most grateful to any of my students who have gone on to continue laning, to continue chanting, to have learned different systems, and especially those who have gone on to teach. A number of my students have become teachers, including my beloved Ron. And I owe a lot to you, Rabbi Kleinbaum. My teaching career of children is due to you. I was laid off from my work career after 9/11 and at loose ends and didn't know what to do with myself. And you suggested that I could teach children the lane, and you even got me a student. And from that, I wound up teaching so many children, both here at CBST and in many other places. And I really owe you that. And thank you so much. And all of the rabbis at CBST over the years who were my rabbis too. I love working with Rabbi Rapport. We have a great relationship. So I'm just so grateful to be part of this institution and to have been here for all this time. And I hope to continue to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jack. What an inspiration you are in form and content. The way you live your life, the gracious way you approach Judaism with such open-heartedness, and the way you bring in so many people. Really, you're an inspiration. So for Hakafot number 7, we'd like to honor all those of you who are setting a goal for yourself on your Jewish journey in 5782. In this year, this new year, Jewish year we are in, what's your goal for this year? Put it in the chat. Do you have a goal on your Jewish journey for 5782? Page 667.
קדוש ונורא, הושיע נא, הושיע נא, רחום וחנון, הצליחה נא, הצליחה נא, שומר הברית עננו ביום קוראנו, תומך תמימים הושיע נא, הושיע נא, תקיף לעד הצליחה נא, הצליחה נא, תמים במעשיו עננו ויום קוראנו. איי 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 עננו, עננו ביום קוראנו. איי 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 עננו, עננו ביום קוראנו. איי איי איי
And for our final Hakafot, Rabbi Rapport and I will offer a blessing to Jack Greenberg, and then we will begin the Torah service, now that we've prepared ourselves for the reading from the Torah.
It was Jack who taught me how to lay in high holiday Torah when I was already working at CBST, and I have to admit that it was scary to be in a place where I was supposed to be a Jewish expert and to step into a classroom admitting that I didn't know something very basic that so many CBST members year after year committed themselves to, so many of them taught by Jack. I was bolstered by the fact that in this class was also at the time cantorial intern Steve Zeidenberg, as well as some other wonderful people who are in the Zoom room tonight. And as has been repeated over and over again, Jack's gentle encouragement, his deep, deep knowledge of the material, but also of his students, to be able to listen so closely and say, no, you're actually half a step off there if you just change your pitch a little bit, is an extraordinary gift. And Jack, the blessing that I have for you is one that you wrote, which maybe is not so surprising because you wrote a lot of the Siddur. But When we recite Aleinu L'Shabeach at CBST, we use Jack Greenberg's words, his Hebrew, and the beautiful meaning that they transmit in their English. And this has always been a part of my history at CBST. This is the first congregation where I ever truly felt that Aleinu L'Shabeach was a prayer whose full heart I could put myself into. And it continues today. Jack was a lead member of our High Holiday laning team who tried to imagine last year and this year, what does it mean to share sacred text, to chant Torah when we're all in different rooms of the house across the entire world. So Jack, you wrote in Aleinu L'Shabeach, we say, Shebara otanu b'tzalmo v'nachfach banu et nishmat chayenu. You recognize that each of your students is created in the divine image, and you breathe into us a spirit and a love and a patience and a belief in a power not all of us knew we had. Shehemik otanu b'limud Torato v'kidshanu b'mitzvoteha. You deepen in us the study of Torah, and we are sanctified by its commandments through our more loving and intimate and close relationship with this text. Thanks to you.
So Jack might be one of the few people who remember that when I first came to CBST 30 years ago, I would lane. I gave that up quickly because there were so many better laners than me at CBST, and what a fantastic thing to have congregants be at the center. But I learned to lane from one of Jack's students, Alan Lepayover. So Jack, I guess that makes me your granddaughter of some kind, that I am the student of your student in that way. But I've been your student in so many ways. There is so much that Jack, you and I did together. And in those early years, you stood for a transformation as well as this commitment to keeping to who CBST was in a way that was a very loving and supportive thing when I first came to CBST, and there was so much controversy around everything. You were always a voice of compassion and of wisdom. And so now, on behalf of the congregation, I offer you this final prayer in the Siddur that we worked on together for so long. The Tfilat HaDerech, the prayer for journey. As you continue on your journey of life with Ron Weiss ever at your side, and the two of you, a formidable team, and we hope and pray the time will come soon that you'll both be able to come into the sanctuary. Yehi ratzon milfanecha, may it be your will, God, of all those who came before us, to guide you and to direct your steps in peace. We pray that you will always come home in wholeness, joy, and peace. We pray that you, Jack, will be saved from all dangers and perils and from all afflictions that threaten our world. May you be granted insight and wisdom to overcome all obstacles. May you act in ways always that reflect your God's compassion and generous love. Listen to our voices today, because you, Holy One, are the one who hears our prayer. Blessed are you, Holy Ancient One of old. We pray that you will continue to guide Jack on his journey through the wilderness and into the land. And let us all say, Amen. Amen.